and good morning to you from California. And for those of you joining us from the East Coast or elsewhere, good afternoon or good evening, as the case may be. Welcome to this first session of the AssetPulse webinar series. And today's webinar is titled Barcode, RFID, or BLE, How to Choose the Right Asset Tracking Technology. I am Vijay Sarathi, Chief Product Officer at AssetPulse, and I'm joined today by Sujatha Bodapati, our CEO and one of the founders. And the reason for this topic for our first webinar is this is the question that our customers most often ask us about, right? And it's the one where we often see the most amount of money being spent in sometimes the wrong places. So before we get started in earnest, and I present the agenda, three quick housekeeping notes. First, I just want to emphasize that this is absolutely not a sales pitch. We're here to make sure that you make the best choice for your use case. And sometimes you understand that is not us. We will have one slide on our company, our pedigree, and all the work that we've done for various customers up front. It'll be a short slide. And then at the end, we'll give you our contact information so that if you have any questions and follow up, you're welcome to reach us. But that's about it. The second thing is there's a recording in progress. And so we're going to record this session, and that'll be made available to you with the slides. A PDF that we've prepared specially for you will also be sent. A link to that will be sent to you at the end of this presentation. And finally, if you have any questions, my colleague Priscilla is monitoring the Q&A panel. So I might look here a little bit on the right to see what's flowing, but she's going to be keeping us honest and keeping the questions answered or made available to us at the end. Of course, if you have any questions, just type them in, and then we'll queue them in for the end of the session. And also, by the way, if you have any suggestions for the next webinar, please feel free to put that into the chat as well. We'll take your recommendations. You might get some ideas towards the during the course of the presentation. All right, so here's the agenda today. We're going to do that quick word on the company, then why this decision matters. Then we'll go into the three technologies, and we'll do each one twice. One is like, how does it work? And then what to watch for. Then all three technologies side by side, the mistakes we actually see people make, the decision framework that we talked about, and then how you can apply that into your own environment. And of course, we'll do the questions, and then we'll wrap up. So that's the agenda. So as promised, here's the brief introduction to the company. So we've been at this for about a couple of decades, and we're based out of San Jose, California. We are a one-stop shop for real-time asset tracking, and that's everything from basically specialized tags, infrastructure, software, support, consulting, etc. And we're deliberately technology agnostic, which means that we use best-of-breed technologies. We put them together in order to address your particular needs, rather than doing one vendor stack. And our customers include Fortune 1000 leaders, government agencies, the Army, Air Force, Department of Energy, etc. So we've been blessed with a number of really excellent customers. Anyway, that's the last you'll hear about us. Let's move on to the agenda. And so we'll talk now about why this decision matters. This is our first section. And let me bring Sujatha in because I think she's very well equipped to answer this. So why does this decision matter, Sujatha?
Thanks, Vijay. Almost every asset tracking project starts with one of the two questions at the top of this slide. Where is that asset right now? The daily frustration of hunting for something exactly when you need it. And the second question, did it leave unexpectedly? Assets moving between departments, buildings, and facilities with nobody knowing until somebody goes looking for it. These aren't hypothetical. Tools are often misplaced on the factory floor. Lab equipment is borrowed between departments and not returned. And often the cost to business isn't proportional to the price tag of the misplaced item. A $35,000 calibrated tool that's missing can halt a production line, but so can a $40 part. Keep that in mind as it becomes relevant when we talk about what's worth tagging. But the number that gets missed is the cumulative one, not one dramatic loss. It's the search time across hundreds of assets and dozens of people day after day. That's a slow leak rather than a burst pipe. Now, the second half of the slide, which is about cost of getting the technology choice wrong. Start with the annual audit trap. Manual inventory is so labor intensive that most organizations can only afford to do it once a year, which means that for the rest of the year, you're operating on stale data. Then the other costs of choosing wrong, wasted investment, low adoption, and paying a second time to redeploy. It usually traces back to one of three things: status quo bias, cost misconceptions, or an environment blind spot. All three come back in the mistake section. So, to be clear, this is not a pitch for any one technology. It's a framework for making the right call for your environment.
Yeah, thanks, Sujata. And that really takes us into the next section, which is the three technologies. So we'll try and keep it, similar for each of these technologies. How does it work, and where does it stop working, right? So let's go on and let's first hit up barcodes and QR codes, because this is the first thing we address because this is what most people run today, right? Barcodes and QR codes are essentially the same one family, right? QR code adds data capacity and phone readability, but pretty much shares every limit that matters with barcodes, right? Both require line of sight scanning, and that's done manually most often. Both of them are immune, of course, to RF-based technologies. So there's no effects of metal liquids or wireless interference. There's no question of that. And the rule of thumb is that if you have, say, under about 500 tracked items in a controlled, low movement type of an environment, then barcode is a reasonable choice. But if you go beyond that, then the challenges with manual scanning, they start compounding pretty fast. And starting with barcodes is really not a mistake. It may be a good choice for you, but staying with it and not really looking or asking the right questions on whether it is actually working for you um, can be the mistake. Right? Can be a mistake. So let's look at now the things to keep in mind. And here's where it gets really hard with respect to barcodes and asset tracking, right? Because I think the one thing to remember, your inventory is only as good as your least diligent employee on their worst day, right? You think about that. Basically, it's very human or manually error prone. So you have to see it in order to scan it, and that's the problem that RFID was built to solve. So let's go on to RFID. And Sujata, I think you've worked with RFID for over 2 decades now. So why don't you give us a bit of an overview?
Sure. An RFID tag is almost a digital barcode with one critical difference: no line of sight needed. Like a barcode, it has no battery, so it has to be activated by an antenna within range, typically between 10 to 20 feet in ideal conditions. And the tag has no location of its own. People often picture a GPS tracker or an air tag. It's neither of these. Location is inferred from proximity to the reader that activated it, which is why reader placement is a critical design decision, not an afterthought. Here we see some sample passive RFID tags on the left. Again, no batteries, many form factors, and shown here with a quarter in the middle of the photo for scale. The tag size affects read range. A smaller tag carries a smaller antenna, which has an impact on its range. So below that, you see some sample handheld RFID readers. And on the right, what people typically do with them. Inventory a whole shelf or a cabinet in a single pass, walk to a specific asset Geiger counter style, or work a pick list.
Right. So let's show you a quick video. This is about 50 seconds, 55 seconds. I'm going to play this short video to show you what this looks like in real life, right? And one thing you will see there are two things, two parts to this short video. You will see how the mobile reader is being used to scan multiple items in one go. Keep an ear out for the beeps. You'll hear a number of beeps, and each beep essentially represents a tag read. And in this video, we're approximately scanning about 50 or 60 tags, and you'll hear a lot of beeps, and that's basically the tag being read, and then sometimes multiple times. And then the second part, you will see a demo of the Geiger counter functionality that Sujata was talking about, where we're trying to locate a particular asset within an office setting. Okay, so let me just play that for you.
Is this sound?
Okay, great. So what you saw there was, as I told you, basically the ability to eliminate line of sight and read multiple items in one shot, which is something you cannot do with barcodes, and then also the ability to go and search for a particular asset. All right, so great. You know, with RFID, what we've eliminated is this line of sight, and we can read multiple tags. But what you see is that you still need a human walking the floor, right? I mean, we perhaps made the human faster, but we didn't entirely remove them. So Sujata, what do you think? I mean, what are solutions to that?
Yes, and that's what fixed readers do. You mount a fixed reader with antenna where the assets that you care about typically pass through, and then you're able to track assets automatically and continuously without anybody walking anywhere. On the right side, you can see three typical installations with our fixed RFID. The first is a portal to track assets moving through a choke point. Second, a shelf or a cabinet that's continuously being monitored. And third is a work in progress bins moving through the factory floor. The key here is that you instrument the points through which the assets pass through, not the whole flow.
Right. So let's talk about the real and practical considerations then. You know, what should people know before they commit to RFID?
The first thing is that to remember, location is inferred, not measured. A read tells you that a tag passed by a reader, not where it actually is now. Antenna placement is the design decision. Metal and liquids will detune tags. A standard RFID sticker tag on a metal cabinet may not read at all. Specialized on metal tags can address this, but the cost of tags is now in dollars rather than cents. And we talked about this earlier. You are detecting when a tag passes by a reader. You're not reading continuous position. So if an asset is left somewhere between, say, two choke points or two doorways, but out of range of either, RFID won't tell you where it is. It'll only tell you the last location it went through and the time. and depending on your RFID setup, the direction in which the tags moved.
Yeah, so that brings up an obvious question, right? In the world of GPS and air tags, isn't there something that really tells me where things are continuously?
There is, and that is where we get into BLE. A BLE tag is a beacon that's constantly transmitting. Unlike an RFID tag, it has a battery, so it doesn't wait to be activated. It talks on its own all day. And because, unlike RFID, it is powered by batteries, it can carry sensors too. And this would be like the likes of temperature monitoring, humidity, shock, etc. So they can monitor condition in addition to position. And before I go further, let's introduce one concept in the context of BLE, and that's a zone.
Mhm.
A zone is the area BLE can confirm an asset is somewhere within it, not the exact spot. BLE doesn't hand you a coordinate on a map. It tells you which zone an asset is in and when it moves from one zone to another. You define the zones, the system reports against them.
I
So the
see.
tag,
So
go
the
ahead.
tag isn't really transmitting then, right? It's not transmitting its location. How does the system know which zone it is in?
That's a good question. So the beacon transmits its ID. Three or more fixed gateways hear it at a different signal strengths, and the system figures out which zone it must be in. So the question that comes up next immediately is how accurate is the location? The reality is that even with the smartest system and algorithms, you can only get an approximate location. Instead of asking how accurate BLE is, ask how small your zones need to be. That number comes down to gateway density, not the technology itself. It's important that the density also holds at the edges too. A beacon on a zone's boundary still needs three gateways to hear it. Missing that is one of the most common reasons BLE deployments underperform. So here is a sample BLE deployment with three tracked zones in dotted red. The highlighted circular areas in light gray are the BLE coverage for each gateway. A beacon outside those zones reports out of zone, but so does a beacon with no coverage at all. It's the same answer for two very different situations.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's kind of summarize this, like we did for RFID. What are some of the real and practical considerations? What should people know before they commit to BLE?
Yeah, a couple things. So we have to remember that every tag has a battery, and most systems alert on low power before it dies. But the moment it does die, it's silent. No error, no event, just gone from the map. That may be manageable at 50 tags, but at 500, it becomes a scheduled program. Also, another important point to remember, zone edges are fuzzy. Location is an estimate from signal strength, so an asset near a boundary can flip between zones.
Right.
RFID gives you a definite crossing, BLE gives you a confident guess. And of course, like RFID, metal and liquids affect BLE also. But the failure is a little messier than RFID. Instead of a missed reading with respect to RFID, you might get a distorted position with BLE that looks real.
Right. So, and then there's also the cost element, right, which runs one way on tags and the other way on infrastructure, right? What I mean is that for RFID, the tags are cheaper, while the infrastructure cost is more expensive. But on the other hand, for Bluetooth or BLE, it's kind of like the per tag cost can be more expensive, but then the Bluetooth gateways or the BLE gateways are themselves relatively cheaper, right? In comparison to RFID infrastructure, at least. So, all right, we're going to go on to the next section. I just want to encourage people to ask any questions, just checking in midpoint. If you have any questions about anything you've heard so far, please put them into the chat and then, or the Q&A, and then we'll take them up. We're going to go on to the next piece. So, right, before we leave BLE entirely, I mean, this is an interesting topic, right? A lot of people here are probably thinking about something that you're really familiar with. You probably are going like, I have an AirTag on my keychain. Why can't I just track things using AirTags? Why just not use them? They seem to be ubiquitous.
Yeah, that's a fair question, actually. You'll be surprised to know that an AirTag is a BLE beacon. The hardware isn't what's different. What's missing is the infrastructure. You don't have any backend infrastructure for AirTags. AirTags get their position from nearby iPhones on Apple's Find My network. So coverage follows people, not assets. That's great on a city street where there are people with iPhones, but it doesn't do much for your warehouse at 2 a.m. in the morning when there's hardly anyone there.
Right, right. I mean, it is interesting. I hear from a lot of people who ask this question and go like, "Oh, can I put an AirTag here or there?" And the interesting thing is it also works only with iPhones. And so sometimes, if you don't have a location where there's many iPhones, not even Android devices, then you're kind of lost in that as well, right? But anyway, there's another important point in this on why it is not really relevant to an enterprise, right? Because on the buyer side, there's nothing really to integrate with. There's no API for the item location. It really is tied to someone's personal Apple ID, and I think Apple caps it at about 32 items, right? I think that's about all they think you can own. So that's about 32 items. So there's no reports, there's no audit trail, there's no answer to who had this last. I think there's a simple alert now that says this tag has been left behind, but that's about it. So I think to be fair, this works great for travel, consumer type things where you have people uh, tracking people, demo kits, laptop bags, luggage, things like that. It's a finder. It's not an asset tracking system, right? So that's where I would leave that. And let's go on to the next section. And this is where we will look at each of these technologies side by side. All right. So I think this is a slide that a lot of people may be tempted to screenshot, and sure, go ahead and do that. But remember, we're also going to be sending you a link to all our presentation material and a decision guide, etc. So you'll have all that. Um, Now, I'm not going to go and read each of these 11 rows to you. I think we're going to focus on some of the important ones. Let's focus on, say, four of them, right? So, Sujata, if somebody could look at only one row in this table to make the decision, which one would you pick? Which one would you point them at?
I think the second row, movement detection and alerts. It separates the three most cleanly than anything else here. Barcode is manual only. Someone has to remember to scan. RFID gives you an event at a choke point, a definite time-stamped crossing. BLE infers it from position continuously. Everything else on this table comes after that row. If you don't need to know about movement, you can probably stay on barcode and save a lot of money. If you do care about movement, then barcode is already out. And the rest is a conversation about where, how often, and what it's worth.
Yeah. So looking at this chart, I see that we see that RFID and BLE, with respect to cost, both say medium to high, which may look like we're dodging, right? So what's the thought?
Here's why it's written that way. Tag cost differs by an order of magnitude. Passive RFID is, cents to a few dollars. BLE is tens of dollars. But infrastructure cost actually runs the other way. Fixed RFID readers with cabling to every antenna, etc., are usually more expensive to install than BLE gateways. Cabling costs are often overlooked. So, which is cheaper genuinely depends on your ratio of assets to area. Many assets in a small area favors RFID. Fewer assets spread across a large area typically is favorable to BLE. Anyone who gives you a straight RFID is cheaper without asking about that ratio is actually just guessing.
Yeah, right. And so if I pick another row here, I think I talk about metal sensitivity, which says high for both RFID as well as BLE. And I want to really comment on that for a second because sometimes there's this idea that people have that, hey, RFID tags, they have all these issues with, metal and liquids, etc. Maybe because the BLE tag has as a power source as batteries, it can power through that or something like that. So they think that it can do better. And that's really not the case, right? You can't defeat physics. The physics is the same. It's RF. Both are RF-based technologies. So you have the same issues with respect to RFID and BLE. So that's something that people should keep in mind, right, Sujata?
Yeah, both are radio in the same physical world. Metal reflects RFID, RF, like we just talked about earlier. Liquid absorbs RF. What differs is the failure mode. RFID fails loudly. The
Mhm.
tag doesn't read, and you know something's wrong. BLE fails quietly. The
Yeah.
signal arrives distorted, and you get a position that looks like real data, but it really isn't. Which is why when someone says, we have a lot of metal, so we'll use BLE,
Right.
that's not a great instinct. The answer to metal is using the right tag for either technology.
Mhm. Right. And let's see, we said we wouldn't go through all 11, so let's pick frequency of audits, right? I think this is an important one as well, annual versus weekly or monthly versus continuous. And I think this is the role that we should point the CFO or the person really interested in the money at because it's the one that translates directly into hours, right? Most organizations do a physical inventory maybe once a year because that's the most that they can afford to do by hand, right? And you change the technology and that frequency changes. So the value isn't the audit itself, it's that your data is never more than, a week old.
And that changes what you can do with it. Weekly data lets you spot a pattern or a trend. Annual data only lets you record a loss.
Right. And so this is a good moment to point out that something that this slide deliberately leaves out, right? So there's no winner column. There really isn't one. Right? That was the whole point of this presentation, right? Which is um, there's not a winner, right? It really applies to your particular situation. So I think one last thing before we move on, if you're looking at this chart, read across a row rather than down the column, right? Most of you will not pick one of these three. You might end up actually picking a couple for different classes of assets within your same building. And that is nothing to be ashamed about. That's not indecision, right? It's actually using the right tool for the right set of assets to get the right data that you need. So we'll come back to that a little later in our decision map. Okay, so now let's go on to the next session. Just want to make sure we're still on time. I think we're doing well here. So let's talk about common mistakes and how to avoid them. So here are 5 common mistakes. And Sujata, which do you see the most often?
The first, and it really isn't close,
Mhm.
it's sticking with barcode because it's the status quo and quietly absorbing the daily frustration of not being able to find things. What makes it hard to spot is that nobody logs it. There's no report that says, we lost 40 minutes today looking for a torque wrench. It just becomes how the day feels. And the next would be the third bullet, which is the expensive cousin. Assuming RFID is too expensive without even running the numbers. And when people do run them, they count tags and readers and forget the labor they are already spending and the cost of the assets they can't find. We have a customer who has 3 full-time people just looking for assets in an outdoor yard. Or when calibrated lab equipment can't be found, its calibration can quietly lapse, putting test results at risk and threatening compliance with various regulatory standards like the FDA 21 CFR Part 820. It also stalls whatever experiment or production step was waiting on it. And if it's shared equipment, that delay cascades to everyone queued behind it. A total cost model that only counts hardware always comes up short.
Right. And I think I'll add one more from my side, which is on the fourth point, right? Not understanding RF behavior, I think is my favorite topic here, probably. It's, especially in a metal-centric environment or something like that, it's quite a problem.
Yeah,
Um,
one important detail on metal, because it's the most misunderstood thing in this whole session. As we mentioned earlier, metal reflects RF. Even a concrete floor can reflect RF.
mhm.
Liquid absorbs it. Those are different problems with different fixes. And the fix for a metal mounted tag isn't just repositioning or generic shielding. It's actually using a specialized design tag for metal built with a ferrite layer that uses the metal part as part of the antenna structure. You do, though, still have to worry about multi-path interference and creation of dead spots, etc. And that's where, the deployment details come into play, and how well you do your tuning, etc.
Got it. So that naturally leads into this slide, right? Which is these are the issues that bite. And by the way, ice cream, lost ice cream is the costliest mistake, I think. But these are the ones that really bite after the purchase order, right? So I think, Sujata, last bullet, uh, not involving end users. Why is that the biggest cause of low adoption?
Yeah, that is actually pretty costly because the people who choose the system are almost never the people who have to live with it. So if a technician is made to walk an extra 30 feet to a barcode reader, or the workflow adds a step at the end of a shift, it'll get worked around. Not maliciously. People are just trying to finish their jobs. And a system that gets worked around produces data that is worse than no data because you still trust it. The fix costs nothing. Put 2 people who are going to be using the system every day in the room during selection. They will tell you in 10 minutes what a pilot takes a few months to discover.
Right. And I think I want to kind of pick on the battery one, right, on top, uh, because it's invisible on day one. I mean, you have a deployment and it's great, everything is working fine, fantastic, and then battery dies, right, in BLE, and then you're just like dead, right? It's just a sudden silent loss. So batteries are important, and keeping batteries maintained is quite a chore. So BLE at 50 tags is a chore. At 500, it's just a huge program, right? With a schedule, you have an owner, you have a spreadsheet, and if nobody owns it, then you find out only when the tag fails silently, like I talked about. It might have been dead for a month. and an asset has been sitting there in a zone for the whole time, right? So you kind of missed it entirely.
Yeah. And the second bullet, buying on tag and reader cost alone.
Right.
The line items people forget are cabling, network, the integration into whatever system of record you already have, and ongoing maintenance. On a fixed RFID deployment, installation can rival the hardware.
Right. Yeah. So I think the fourth bullet, I think that's also worth visiting, right? Because it's really a failure of let's say imagination rather than budget, right? Most organizations audit annually because that's what they've been used to, and that's what is possible with the technologies that they have. But very few ask the question, what frequency what is the frequency with which you need that data for your operational needs, right? And if the answer to that question is monthly and you're doing it just once a year, then you're basically running on guesswork for the rest of the year, right? For the rest of the 11 months. And I think that's a decision that I don't think nobody's ever made consciously, right? So I think that kind of pretty much covers the common mistakes. Now, let's move on to the next section and talk about how do you avoid all of this stuff? I think it comes down to these 5 questions. And if you remember nothing else from this session today, I think it would be these 5 things. So let's get into that, right? Here are the 5 questions. Answer them in this order, and I think it'll help you determine what technology, it will help you determine the technology far more reliably than any other spec sheet or chart that we put out there. Because in our experience, a failed deployment has really skipped thinking about one of these, right? So let me take the first question here, which is what are you tracking and what is it worth? So an asset's value can determine kind of the practical ceiling for the cost per tag, right? So if you have, let's say, a $30 beacon, BLE beacon attached to a $100 part or item, that may not make sense, right? 30 for $100. But then if you have like a $35,000 calibration tool, then a $30 part, a $30 BLE tag is a no-brainer, right? But then again, I think the point I made and we made earlier on is that that's just not the justification, right? Just the cost of the item is not the justification. I think Sujata made the point earlier about how a $40 part that stops your manufacturing line, and we've seen that, right? Happen many, many times. That's absolutely worth tagging, right? So the real question is, what does it cost you when something goes missing? Not what does it cost to buy, right? I think that's the summary there.
Question 2. Where does it live and what is the environment like? This is the most often skipped and the most expensive to get wrong.
Right.
Metal, freezers, outdoor exposure, washdowns, an IPA wipe down, temperature exposure. All of it changes which tags work, and none of it shows up on a spreadsheet. It only shows up on the floor. My advice costs nothing. Walk your own site before you talk to any vendor, including us. Write down what's metal, what's wet, what's hot or frozen, and what's outdoors.
Right. But I think number 3, which is how often does it move and what's the pattern of movement, right? Does it move along paths? And I think the path is something that is very key or critical here, right? If there are specific paths, like it's moving through doors or doors or gateways or stations of some kind, then you can go ahead and instrument them, right? But if the asset is just wandering without following a path, then there are no paths to instrument. And that can also narrow down your options, right, in terms of what exactly works for you. So I think question 4 is often underappreciated, Sujata.
Yeah, question four. The question is, do you need to know when it moves or just where it ends up? It's the definitive question on the slide, and it separates BLE from RFID more cleanly than any spec. RFID answers when. A tag crosses a portal as it leaves a room is a discrete time-stamped event. You know it happened and you know exactly when and where. BLE answers the where. It's a continuous position, or as we said earlier, a zone that you can walk to. These are different problems. If you need to know that something left a building, that's an event and that's RFID. If you need to find the thing right now, that's a position and that's BLE. People buy the wrong one because they never really articulated which question they were actually asking.
Right. Yeah, and so then that leads to the last one here, right? Do you need to detect unexpected movement? I think here, if the answer is yes, then manual scanning is already disqualified, right? Because a barcode, as we talked about earlier, only records the movement when somebody remembered to go scan those assets, right? Which means that the movement that you most want to capture or catch um, are exactly the ones that you won't have, right? So I think that becomes critical. So I think, it's a good summary if you can kind of keep this model in your head as you're thinking through as the five organizing questions, then I would visit this slide, right? So now let's go and flip the same thing that we've been talking about kind of into a different format, right? It's the same logic, more as a lookup table, right? You find the row that most closely aligns to your particular situation, and then you have an answer on the other end. So I think in the interest of time, Sujata, I'll give you two that I hear the most, right? So amongst our customers, we hear work in process in a factory, and then there's lab equipment with calibration compliance, right, being the use case behind it.
Yes, Vijay, yeah. Work in progress on a factory floor, that's RFID at choke points. The material follows a defined path through process stages, so you instrument the stages. With respect to lab equipment, here the driver isn't convenience. It's, for example, calibration risk. RFID lets you find equipment coming due before someone reaches for one that shouldn't be in use. And it logs where every instrument was where every instrument was and how it moved. So no scan is actually required.
Right. And so then I think the row that I'll draw your attention to is the second from the bottom, right? The low volume, low movement, assets rarely lost or moved. So here, I think folks, barcode or QR code might just be the right answer, right? We're just being honest here because that's not what we do at AssetPulse. We specialize in RFID and BLE, but I think if that's what you're looking for, then go with barcodes, right? Um, and then the last thing I'll say is that hybrid deployments are a thing, right? They are completely legitimate and common often. Plenty of facilities that we see, even customers that we serve, have two of these for different type of asset classes or for different locations, right? So it's not a failure to standardize. It's really about fitting the right tool to the right job. So what you're standardizing is not is this is the system of record, right, at the back, not the tag. That's just a means of collecting information for your system of record. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And again, I think we're on time. We're doing good on time here. I think thanks for staying with us. I think let's now get to the Q&A session, right? And I think there's a few questions that have been coming in. And by the way, if you haven't done so, please put your questions in as well. So I'm going to turn here and look at my Q&A panel and see what's come in. So I think let's look at this first one. What's the smallest pilot that can tell us something useful? Okay, so Sujata, you want to take that one while I look at the,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Actually, you don't need a very elaborate pilot. You can do it with, say, 20 to 30 assets, get the tags on them, whatever technology you want to use or you're trying out or you're piloting, and then keep it, try it out in the different environments if they are dramatically different. And also make sure that you have someone dedicated to actually spending time on the pilot. And you really don't need like a couple months. You can even do it in 2 to 4 weeks. That should be enough for you to be able to determine whether this is going to work for you or not.
Okay, great. So we have one coming in here which says, what portion of tags are missed by a reader? Either a handheld or fixed RFID reader in a warehouse with tens of thousands or millions of parts. So, what
That
portion? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we can't give you hard numbers, but this is where you want to do some testing. So, for example, if you had a warehouse, like Procter and Gamble, where you had a bunch of kitchen towels or toilet paper where there's no metal, then the likelihood of you picking up the RFID tags are actually pretty good. But then if you have a warehouse where there's a lot of metal, automotive parts, for example, something like that, then actually you will have to do some serious testing and see, maybe it may require some reconfiguring how you place parts in the warehouse on the shelves, etc. So, but if you didn't do that and you just tried to use it on metal, then the likelihood of you picking up everything is not very high. Because remember, RF does not travel through metal. So if you have metal parts on a shelf and they are one behind the other or one on top of the other, if you can't get RF to the tag on the part because it has to travel through other metal, you may not be able to pick it up. So those are the ones where you really want to do some testing. And then, remember, even if you're using RFID or BLE, you must be open to doing some reconfiguring something. It could be part of your environment, it could be the way you are actually collecting your data, but it's difficult to just slot in this kind of technology into your existing business process and expect it all work.
Right. And I think it's a question of instrumenting your process the right way, right? I mean, you could still miss a few tags, but then your system can accommodate that, right? It can basically smooth out the misses and say like, oh, I saw it
Yes,
here, but I didn't see it here, but I saw it again here. So it obviously moved through this location, right?
exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah, so there's
Yes,
a lot of
you.
things. Yeah, it's not, I think again, sorry, Sujata, not to interrupt you, but I think it's really, your business process, how the asset is moving through the system. And so it's not like a hard and fast, like, okay, this is how many tags you're going to miss. Okay.
Yeah, and one quick point also, just like your cell phone, right? It doesn't guarantee that it's going to be able to put every call through, right? RF is that's the nature of RF, and so no reader or tag can guarantee, or tag manufacturer can guarantee that every tag will be read every time.
Right.
So the system as a whole has to keep that premise in mind. And then, so it might be the software that comes in to help, and not make assumptions that it is expecting to read every tag every time.
Got it. Yeah, let's just move on because we have a few questions coming in and I want to get as many as possible here. So this one is like, which technology is good for a fashion brand with 4,000 ASP? Um,
So fashion brand, is that primarily, would that be, so if it's like apparel, then, any time you're doing something retail or in a warehouse where you have thousands of items, RFID is the way to go. But now, if you have fashion brand, but you are, tracking expensive bags, for example, that could be thousands of dollars in a warehouse, maybe a blue BLE might be useful. So again, it's, going through those list of questions to see what is appropriate.
Right. Okay, so I might pipe into this one first, which is like, are there any robots that move around the reader or antennas instead of a human and thereby provide better visibility? So let me just take a quick crack at that. So that's a common thing, right? People, I talked about how QR codes and barcodes are manual. So there's always like, can we automate that? And like you talk about FedEx and UPS, they're obviously using barcodes and then as they pass through an automated system. So you're automating that in one way. Similarly, in RFID, it's common for people to think about, can I mount the RFID reader on a robot or some kind of moving device? We have customers who put it on a golf cart in an open yard and taking inventory of items in an open yard, for example. So there's many of these things that you can do. We have customers reaching out to us talking about putting them on drones, and there are challenges there with respect to interference, etc. So yeah, there are many. So we have and not that this was a pitch for us, but we have seen this and we've done it for many customers, as in put it on some kind of system that moves so that you can kind of track it. Sujata, if you want to add anything to.
No, I think that's fair. Conceptually, robots make a lot of sense. I think, like, for example, in a warehouse, where it's all open. But typically, you get into an enterprise and then you have issues like, oh, I need to access control. We need to badge in to be able to go into this area, to be able to do scans, etc., deal with humans. So then it becomes a little more complicated. But conceptually, yes, they can all be on the table.
Right. Okay. So I don't know if our colleague is answering this, but there's like, do we need a dedicated in-house person assigned to maintaining this once we adopt any of these technologies?
So what it is it's not necessarily a dedicated person, but you need an owner.
Mhm.
You need someone who is making sure that the system, that, whatever is happening is actually happening, right? And then making sure you're getting the data out. And if you, for example, many customers would start with just a hand scanner. You see how, it's a lot more efficient than barcode, right? But they don't want to necessarily go to the next step and start putting fixed readers. Then you need someone who actually owns that and says, okay, we want to make sure that we are actually scanning once a week. Because
Mhm.
typically the people, it's never dedicated. Typically, the person who owns this actually has other jobs too, other responsibilities also. So you want to make sure that this person actually takes ownership a little seriously. And it's even better if the system as a whole keeps reminding the owner that, hey, these things have to happen because they didn't happen. So, but
Right.
not needed. A dedicated person is not needed.
Okay,
No.
great. We have about 3 or 4 minutes more, 3 minutes more, I would say. So let's take a couple more here. How long do tags last is the question. Like, is there a
That's a good,
lifespan?
Vijay, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I can take that. So basically, we talked about RFID and then there's Bluetooth, right? So Bluetooth, obviously, we talked about battery life and stuff. And it really depends on the Bluetooth side. Let me start there. It really depends on how often this tag is transmitting or being used. And so you get some tags that last about 3 years or so. But if they're used more frequently, then, and of course, if there are sensors attached, et cetera, then the lifespan decreases or the time between battery changes decreases. But for RFID, RFID has no battery, and it is really reflecting the RF energy that is coming in from a signal. So, I mean, theoretically, it can last indefinitely. There's nothing that is stopping that from lasting indefinitely, apart from maybe damage to the antenna or some type of situation where it's been physically damaged. So,
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, that's why it's important to get the right tag for the right environment and the use case. So for
Right.
example, we had one customer who was an oil and gas who was putting tags on pipe that was shipping offshore going into the ocean. And
Right.
one of the things that they wanted to make sure is if a hammer is taken to the tag will survive that, because
Right.
inadvertently they could actually hit the tag. So then you can't take a really delicate or fragile tag and then put it on the pipe. You need a tag that is ruggedized enough for the environment and for the use case that you have. Same thing with IPA wipe downs, right? You need a tag that will survive isopropyl alcohol wipe downs. So
Right.
those are the only other things I would add.
Okay, we'll take one quick one here and then we'll have to wrap up. It's like, how do you, I mean, can you actually say, are we able to track RFID tags in a cabinet?
Yeah, actually, you could put antennas inside the cabinet and track it in real time. That is very possible. There are some challenges to it because typically cabinets are metal. So then, you have an enclosed cabinet which acts like a Faraday cage. And so then there are some, you have to do a little bit of magic with the tuning, etc., of the antennas. But absolutely, you can track. In fact, we have customers who actually do that. You're storing equipment in cabinets. People are coming in, taking stuff out and putting stuff back in. So you want to know, what's there at every moment. And so, yeah, that's very possible to do.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. And then we got a couple, 3 minutes here. I just wanted to wrap up and leave you with some, we promised you some materials, etc. I want to talk about how we get to all of that stuff. So first of all, thank you all for attending this first webinar session. Really am really excited to see the amount of participation we got and the interest we got from here. And thanks for staying through to the end here. So we prepared a download that will be made available for you via email. It's a nice, handy technology selection guide, which kind of is nicely encapsulates a lot of the things that we talked about here. You will also have a pointer to this slide deck and a recording as soon as we're able to download it ourselves and process it from Zoom here, so that the recording will be available. And then we'll also say, we're here. As I said, we didn't talk about our company, etc., but we're here to help. And so if we can help you, feel free to go to our website and click on the schedule a free consultation button, and you'll be able to book a free 30-minute technology assessment session where we will listen to you, listen to your particular scenario, and walk you through this kind of framework and decision framework so that you can make the right choice for your particular situation. And if you'd like to read more, we have a lot of material on our website. We've recently redesigned it and added a lot of content in there. So if you haven't seen it before or haven't visited it in a while, please do so. Go to the blog section. A lot of things that we talked about there are actually discussed in detail. So you should be able to see, again, you'll be able to get these slides. So you'll see these exact links to these blogs which talk about these specific topics as well. So that's it. And wanted to thank you. And then we'll leave you with email addresses for Sujatha. Sujatha, thank you very much. And for helping us with this presentation. And Priscilla, thanks for your help on the back end, monitoring the questions and keeping us honest with respect to time. I hope this was a very useful presentation for you. And we look forward to hearing from you about what we could talk to you next in our next webinar session. Please send us messages offline as well. And until next time, goodbye.
Bye bye.